Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Tracy, and if you don't know me, I have a passion for upcycling clothing and I teach sewing on here. I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas. I can't wait to share the tutorial on this holiday dress. For this project, you're gonna need some stretch fabric as well as like any 3/4 inch lace trim if you want. It's optional. You can also just do like a bias binding. I made a digital sewing pattern for you guys. It's available on my Etsy shop. I have linked it down below. I know it's been a while since I've made a new tutorial. It's a very beginner friendly tutorial, so I hope you guys enjoy it, and please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. After you've printed out your pattern pieces, you're going to just take some tape and just line up the edges with each other so you're not overlapping anything. You're just lining up the pages edge to edge, as you can tell. So normally I indicate numbers on the corners, but this one's the prototype, so in the final PDF that you actually download, that will have numbers indicating where to place the pages. You can see that the margins like kind of cut off a bit of the pattern, so you're just going to take a pen and just kind of fill in those gaps. So you're just connecting the lines, and this is what the pattern looks like when it's fully taped together. And now that you have your pattern pieces, you can just start by taking the garment you're going to cut up and thrift flip, or just some fabric to start making your dress. And I just start by taking this velvet like top or tunic, whatever, and I'm just cutting the sleeves off first and opening up the side seams and the shoulder seam so I can like get the most out of the fabric. Take your pattern and just place it on your fabric and just line up the straight grain to the straight grain of the fabric. And for velvet, since the pile is like thick and it likes to make your pattern pieces like shift a lot, I'm just grabbing some tailor's chalk and just chalking and outlining the pattern piece, because velvet loves to move around as well. So it's easier when I just cut the chalk line versus pinning this pattern piece and then cutting it out. And I love using my rotary cutter just because I feel like I can just cut so much more precisely than with scissors. It just gives me such crisp, clean lines, and it makes it easier as well since I'm using a stretch velvet. I think I forgot to mention you want to use stretch fabric for this project. For the bust piece of this dress, you want to cut it on the fold. So I didn't have enough fabric to cut mine on the fold, so I had to add a 1/4 inch seam allowance to the center front of that pattern. And then I'm gonna have to sew the bust pieces together, but it's so much easier if you just cut it on the fold because it'll look a lot cleaner in the front of the dress. And I'm just repeating these steps to the other pieces. So for the center back piece, you're also going to cut that piece on the fold. So just follow the instructions on the pattern pieces of how many pieces to cut out. The excess fabric, I like to cut out 1.5 inch strips that are about like 16 inches long for my straps. And then I proceeded to cut out some other strips so I can use as like a sash to tie around my waist on the dress. I didn't have enough fabric to cut my back panel on the fold, or else it would have been one piece, so I had to add a 1/4 inch seam allowance at the center back and then pin it together. And I went ahead and just overlocked it. So on the body, if you actually cut the dress on the fold, it will lay completely flat, versus when you see the final dress on me, it's slightly like curving out because of that seam. For the front of the dress, I'm gonna take the pieces and just overlock at the princess seam. So I'm just overlocking the princess seams of each piece. After overlocking the princess seams, I'm taking some tailor's chalk and marking where I want my slit to start. So I mark about like 6 inches from the hem. So after marking where the slits are going to start on your dress, you're going to just place right sides together and pin from that chalk line all the way to the top of the dress. Just ease everything in. So next you can just take it to the sewing machine and sew from that chalk line all the way to the top, and you're just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And when you reach the chalk line mark for the top of the slit, don't forget to back tack a few times. And next I just press those seams open, and I'm taking the bust part of the dress and I'm just going to overlock the underbust seam on the front panel and the underbust seam on the bust. And now that the underbust seams are overlocked, I'm just going to take the front panel and just like overlap it over the bust piece a 1/4 inch, and then pin these two layers together and do a top stitch to sew it. And I do it this way just because I don't want the lace to be like bulky when it's like stitched on top of this seam, if that makes sense. But you're also welcome to just sew the seam normally if you don't want to add lace on the underbust. after top stitching those two pieces together, I take my lace and kind of figure out how much I need for the underbust seam, and I also do this to the top of the neckline. And I need to overlock the neckline before I actually sew lace to it, but for the underbust lace, I'm just doing a basic straight stitch to stitch either side of the lace down, and I'm using like a small stitch size, which is about a stitch size 2, and this will still allow your garment to stretch. And this is what it looks like with the lace sewn onto the underbust seam, and now I'm just overlocking the front of the neckline before I can sew the lace on. So you don't really have to overlock your stretch fabric because it won't fray, but I just choose to because it looks nicer on the inside of the garment. I just top stitch this lace to the neckline and I only stitch on one side, but you can also just do a bias binding with just your fabric and make bias tape to finish the end off if that's how you want to finish your neckline on your dress and underarms. But now we can just move on to attaching the dress together at the side seams. So take your back panel and just pin your side seams together and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I overlock my seams together just because it is the best way to sew stretch fabrics, but you're welcome to just use a sewing machine and just do a straight stitch on a small stitch setting. The stitches won't break because it is on a small setting and your garment is cut on the greatest stretch to be around the body, not up and down, so it should be fine. After sewing the side seams, now we can do the finish on the underarm and the back neckline. I'm just going to take some lace to finish that, but I first have to overlock it. And for the back neckline to actually stay in place, I like to cut my lace about like 1 inch or 2 shorter than the length of the back and the underarm when you measure it. So I just remove like 2 inches from that measurement, and then I just stretch as I sew it onto the neckline, if that makes sense. So you're just stitching right at the bottom, right alongside that overlock stitch you just did. So I'm just doing the small stitch and just stitching and stretching this lace as I go. By stretching the lace at the back, you're gonna have a more snugged fit at your back, so it'll actually like hold since it is a lower back design. And I'm taking some more lace trim and just kind of cutting some off so it measures about like a 1/2 inch wide, so I can like encase it inside my straps. So I'm placing like right sides together with the lace on one side and just pinning it together, and then I just take it to the overlock machine and sew a 1/4 inch, so I end up with like a 1/2 inch strap with some lace trim sticking out of it. And you can use a safety pin to turn it right side out, or a loop turner. A loop turner makes this so much easier to do. And now to attach the straps to the strap point, I'm kind of just cutting around the lace to kind of make it look more appliqued. So I'm cutting around like a flower to make it look nice at the strap point, and then I'm just placing pins to attach the strap, and next I just take it to the sewing machine and do a zigzag stitch to hold it together. Since these straps are attached at the side seam for an open back look, I recommend trying the dress on to see where your strap is going to hit when you like fully stretch it. So stretch it when you're trying it on, and then just use a safety pin to kind of mark how long you want them. So mine ended up measuring 13 inches finished, and then I just take the ends of these straps and attach it to the side seam and just do a zigzag stitch. And now I can attach my clothing tag at the center back. So I just took some lace and just kind of like covered the top of the clothing tag to kind of encase it into the dress, since I don't like have a lining to sew it into. So this was like the easiest way to do it. Just cover it with some lace and make it look pretty on the inside. And we're almost done. All we have left is to do the hem. So I'm just going to overlock the hem first, and then we can go ahead and do the top stitching on the slits. For the top stitching on these slits, I like to turn my dress inside out when I do this. So as you can see, the seam is opened on the inside on the slits. So you're just going to fold that seam allowance at the bottom, if that makes sense. So you're just gonna like fold it over and do it evenly like the rest of the seam is. So you're like folding back a 1/4 inch, and you want to pin this all the way down on each side of the slit. And next I flip it right side out and I move the pins to the outside, holding that seam allowance back. If that makes sense, it's just easier for me when I actually go ahead and top stitch it on the sewing machine to have them on the outside. And that's what a slit looks like all pinned, and you're going to just do a 1/4 inch top stitch all the way around. So you're going to go all the way up to the top and then square off and then all the way to the bottom like a rectangle. So I'm starting at the bottom, and when I get to the top of the slit, I'm going to go past it a 1/4 inch and then pivot and go across until I get to a 1/4 inch away from the other side, and then I pivot back down and stitch. And your slits look very clean on the outside with the top stitch, so just make sure you're using matching thread. And now we can finish the hem. So I'm just folding up 5/8 of an inch and doing this all the way around. I take it to the sewing machine and just do a 1/2 inch top stitch all the way around to finish the hem off. And don't forget to back tack at the front and the back of the dress, and then also at the center piece when you hem it, don't forget to back tack so none of your stitches unravel, and the dress is done.